what has your research suggested that companies should be thinking about when trying to get feedback from employees at scale? So we've talked really about how managers can how employees can give feedback to managers can solicit for feedback from employees. But what about at scale, and how has this changed? If it has changed during the pandemic.
I think it's a great question. So you're right. A lot of things we talked about thus far is really kind of those psychological dynamics between a manager and his or her employees. And when you start asking this question from a policy standpoint across a large number of people within an organization, I do think it starts to bring up different sets of dynamics and policy implications. So I think the first is going back to that notion of an ecosystem. So you can't just rely on practicing managers to informally get this feedback and relay those messages up the chain of command. So that's where deploying some of these surveys at scale can be really useful to identify some of those themes and such. I also think it brings to question different sets of analyses than what managers may analyze on their own. Mm-hmm. As a manager, if you're trying to create that environment with one employee, you can get some feedback from that one employee, and you perhaps know that one person because you've developed that relationship over a period of time. You kind of know what's on their mind and what's not. When you're starting to look at this at scale across 100,000 employees, now all of a sudden you can do different sets of analyses across employees. What are the topics that employees routinely speak up about? What are those hot button issues? But also, what are the topics that they don't? What are you missing out on? And one of the, again, kind of, at least for me, some of the surprising research that has been shown for about the last 10, 15 years on this is this notion of speaking up as a behavior that you can measure. How often do you speak up? Never to always. That is not the same as how often do you withhold an idea. And so you can have high levels of voice and also high levels of silence or high levels of withholding. And as you start to ask those questions across discrete topic areas, what we have seen is that there are pretty material differences. So let me explain. If you're going to ask someone, how often do you speak up about your task, your job, your ability to accomplish your work? Usually it's high levels of voice and medium to low levels of withholding. If there are things that prevent you from being effective at your work, people tend to vocalize that more readily. Speaking of George Floyd and issues of race and diversity, if you start to ask questions around speaking up about diversity, equity, inclusion issues at work, all of a sudden voice starts to come down. People don't speak up near as often, and withholding also goes up. And so as you start to look across different sets of topics, your task, your ability to coordinate with others, team dynamics, your relationship with your boss, senior leadership team, the strategic direction of the organization, your compensation, D&I issues, I can go on and on and on, right? And what we found is there are topics where people feel very comfortable speaking up, and there are topics that they don't. And so you can't just ask blanketly, how often do you speak up? Or how comfortable are you? Because that glums all these different topic areas together.
Yeah.
If there are issues that you think are bubbling up, you have to be able to ask about those topics, because there are different drivers, there's different ways for people to feel more or less comfortable about some topics that are just not relevant for others. And then of course, what you can do to action on that depends on getting that feedback in the first place. So, to me, like coming out of this hybrid environment where we haven't had those opportunities to develop the similar types of relationships that we have in person, to me, one of my fears is we're not really having similar opportunities to hear what's actually on people's minds, what they're actually dealing with, and therefore the types of policies, routines, and practices that we should be devoting more resources towards.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.